So I've had this Specialized Stumpjumper S3 29er for 3 months now. Been riding it 2 or 3 times a week in a variety of conditions and all sorts of terrain. So I thought I'd just do a quick update on how I'm finding it. I think probably talking about the geometry as the main thing to start with, because that's what most questions I've had have been around. Firstly, the head angle. I think it rides really well in all sorts of situations, whether that's on tight, steep single track. It climbs brilliantly on single track and fire roads. I've had no noticeable front end lightness or wandering that I could really say was an issue. And then when you point it downhill and it's steep, it's an absolute pleasure. So I think that the head angle on paper sounds slack. I'm running it in the high, which is going to be 64.5 degrees. It doesn't actually translate into something that feels particularly slack. It's not something I've had to adapt my riding to cater for, and I'm really comfortable on it. It's felt natural and enjoyable, but definitely confidence inspiring on the steeper stuff. The seat angle is definitely something that I've noticed for the better. I'm 189 centimeters and I run my seat, relatively high, which in theory is even pushing it back slightly further behind the bottom bracket, but it feels great to ride on. I feel very much over the pedals when I'm going uphill. Live in a place called Nelson, New Zealand, which is pretty much renowned for having a lot of steep hills. Most rides start with a 3, 4, maybe up to 800 meter climb before we start any descending, so it certainly had its credentials tested in terms of climbing, and I'm really comfortable on it. I've done 5-6 hour rides on it, climbing over 2,500 meters, and it's been really comfortable. The climb switch on the shock is something that I think very much helps its climbing characteristics, so I pretty much always flick it into firm for climbing, and that really does firm up that rear shock and back end quite considerably. The length of the frame, this is the S3, like I say, I'm 189 centimeters, pretty typical proportions in that. It doesn't feel long or short, to be honest with you. I feel very comfortable on it. I've got a lot of weight over the front wheel when I need it, but at the same time the reach is nice and comfortable when I'm climbing and pedaling. So really the reach, the head angle, the bottom bracket height and the seat angle haven't given me any cause for concern. Bottom bracket height is something that people fixate on. It is very low in the low setting. I've only run this bike in high since I've got it. I did find I had pedal strikes for the first couple of weeks and I wasn't really sure why. I wasn't sure if the cranks were too long or if I just needed to adapt my riding style. In the end it came down to I'd set this shock up way too soft, too much sag, which isn't that easy to tell when you're with a coil compared to air. I've only had air shocks before. I did go through the factory settings. On a 550 pound spring, I'm 85 to 90 kilos when I got all my bike kit on, but I changed out the spring for a 600 pound one and I haven't clipped a pedal since, and that's been a good 2 months of regular cross country and shuttling and downhill riding. In terms of the frame, the only other feature really worth mentioning, I think, is the swap box, which is probably 20% bigger than previous models in terms of the opening, and the amount of stuff you can fit in there is great if you want to. Obviously it all adds weight to the bike, but I've got a pump, tools, bit of medical stuff in there, an emergency blanket and an inner tube, and there's still space to spare, and it gets ridden in all conditions, so it's certainly not had an easy life up to this point. But no, it's running well. Really happy with it. No creaks, no groans. The bearings are intact. Everything's fine. I haven't got any sloppiness or sort of settling in, which you may expect. It's been pretty bulletproof to this point. So really happy with the frame and the geometry and the ride characteristics, and overall just that main chassis of the whole bike really, I think, is spot on. Very happy with it. The wheels have been excellent. They're the nice light Roval Traverse carbon rims on some decent DT hubs. Haven't had any issues whatsoever with denting or impacts or the spokes coming loose or anything like that, so they've been pretty much fit and forget. Mostly running grid butchers on the back. Got a Hillbilly on the front, 2.6, maybe 20 psi. The drivetrain, GX Eagle, I don't have any problems with it at all. I find it shifts efficiently. I don't worry too much about the rear mech like I might do if it was XO or XX1. Moving on to the brakes, got these Code RSCs, which are probably my favourite brakes that I've owned, and they feel great. They're very well put together, with the bearings in the pivot point instead of the bushings, which keeps the lever nice and rattle free, and I couldn't be happier with them. So I've not had to touch them, bleed them, change them. They've got the pad contact. I think I've been through one set of sintered pads so far. Changing pads was super easy, heaps of power. Threw on a slightly shorter Renthal stem, that's a 35mm. I'm not sure if it's helped the handling or not. It's certainly not taken away from it. It's a little bit lighter than the stock item. Again, just because, not for any reason. I think the stock stem that came with it was a 40mm, and it was a real nice unit, so just change for change's sake. The new command post I'm really impressed with. It's 160mm over the old ones that used to be 125mm. They are bulletproof, they're super easy to look after, they seem to last for years and years, and it's working great. It's 160mm, the drop seems perfect for me. I seldom have to put the seat down any further than that, so that's great. The other two things to really touch on are the Fox 36s. Again, great fork, really enjoying using them. Had the Olin's RXF 36s in an old bike, and they were hands down my favourite fork to date. Hard to tell if these are better, but I certainly enjoy riding them just as much. On the rear shock, just changed that spring out to a SL 600 Fox 1 from the 550 that came as standard. But like I say, with the firmer spring, it's definitely kept the sag at a decent level for my weight, and that stopped any pedal clips whatsoever. So just in summary, I can highly recommend the bike. Yeah, I'd be happy with this as my trail bike, even if I live somewhere that wasn't really gravity focused. I think it pedals really well. I think it handles well. I think it's put together well. I think the price point's great. I think the gear on it is awesome. Obviously, if you're somewhere that's got a lot of steep and gnarly terrain, it really comes to life. But the main things I hear about: head angle, bottom bracket height, reach, I really wouldn't think about them too much, but in all honesty, coming from an enduro, I can't say that it's been a radical change in terms of how the bike feels, but it is definitely a big change in how it rides and how I ride it. And I won't be switching it out anytime soon. I'm delighted with it. So thanks for listening. And like I say, if you got any questions, drop me a line. Cheers.